Every great philosophy is born from a great struggle, but few intellectual journeys begin from a place as profoundly desperate as that of Epictetus. His life is perhaps the most powerful answer history has ever offered to the question: can a human being truly be free, even when legally owned by another? Our story does not start in a tranquil garden, nor in the privileged halls of power. It begins in the bleak, non-negotiable reality of the first century of the Common Era, in the Roman city of Hierapolis, located in the ancient region of Phrygia. The man who would become one of the most revered Stoics was named Epictetus, a name that carries the precise, brutal weight of his circumstance. It means quite simply, the acquired one, a possession, a living chattel. He entered the world not as an individual with agency, but as a resource to be bought, sold, and commanded. This fundamental, existential injustice, this absolute powerlessness over his own body and destiny, was not merely a tragic accident of birth. It was the very crucible that would refine his philosophy, making it eternally relevant. His wisdom is not theory. It is the hard-won manual for survival, crafted by a man who knew the absolute bottom of human experience. The currents of the Roman slave trade swept the young Epictetus to Rome, the vast, magnificent, and often savage heart of the empire. Here, fate delivered him to a master who provided the perfect, ironic counterpoint to his eventual wisdom: Epictetus. This man was a phenomenon of the age, a former slave himself who had clawed his way into a position of immense power as the personal secretary to the Emperor Nero. Epictetus, a man who had tasted freedom and then willingly traded his moral independence for wealth and proximity to the throne, was a creature of constant fear and corruption. He was a legal freedman, but utterly enslaved to his ambition, his insecurity, and the volatile whims of his imperial master. He was the perfect, tragic example of a soul in bondage, holding the legal papers of ownership over the true, burgeoning free spirit of Epictetus. It was in this household that the physical sacrifice was made. The incident, so often recounted by later generations, burns with the intensity of myth, yet speaks directly to the core of his teaching. In a moment of sheer, brutal ego, a master testing the limits of his absolute control, Epictetus began to twist Epictetus's leg. The young slave, focused and serene, looked at his master not with pleading, but with rational prophetic observation. He simply stated, "If you continue that way, you will break my leg." The master, in his pride and cruelty, continued. The bones snapped, and Epictetus, feeling the immediate searing pain, merely completed his thought with the same calm observation: "I told you so. It is broken." This injury, a permanent crippling limp, was the ultimate visible mark of his philosophical victory. It was a scar he carried until his dying day, a constant, physical testament to the fact that while the body, the external possession, could be maimed, the internal capacity for rational judgment and moral response could not be touched. The master had inflicted pain, but Epictetus had claimed the ultimate, most sacred ground, the sovereignty of his own mind. He realized then that his enslavement was merely a circumstance, a fact of the external world, not a judgment upon his moral value. Despite his servitude, his keen intellectual fire could not be extinguished. He found solace and structure in the lectures of Musonio Rufo, the preeminent Stoic philosopher in Rome. Musonio taught him the doctrine that would provide the language for his experience. The radical teaching that virtue is the only good, and that everything else, including one's health, one's wealth, and yes, one's freedom, are mere indifference. For Epictetus, this was the gospel of liberation. It meant that the man who lived in the palace, riddled with fear and seeking fleeting pleasures, was more pitiable than the slave who, despite his chains, cultivated honesty, courage, and self-respect. The actual slave was the truly free man. The powerful master was the psychological captive. The details of his eventual freedom remain lost in the bureaucratic dust of the empire, but the result is what matters. When the legal chains were removed, Epictetus did not abandon philosophy for a life of comfort. He dedicated himself to showing others how to achieve the internal liberation he had discovered in bondage. When the Emperor Domitiano unjustly banished all philosophers from Rome in 92 Common Era, Epictetus simply packed his meager belongings and relocated his school to Nicopolis in Greece. His fame was built entirely on the moral force of his personality and the absolute practicality of his teaching. His lecture room was sparse, his own life simple, but his words drew students from every corner of the empire, ambitious young men, wealthy senators, and even future emperors like Marco Aurelio. Epictetus never wrote a single word himself, disdaining the polished style of formal literature. The philosophy we treasure today, the dynamic discourses, and the essential no-nonsense summary, the manual, Enchiridion, was captured and transcribed faithfully by his dedicated student Ariano. Ariano essentially gave voice to the master, preserving the demanding personal and urgent quality of his instruction. The entire foundation of this life-changing wisdom, the first commandment he laid down for those who sought a meaningful life, is the wisdom forged in that moment when his leg was broken. It is a single, uncompromising act of awareness, the dichotomy of control. This principle is the master key to his entire system. It demands that you must, without exception, divide the entire world of experience into two distinct, separate spheres. Those things that are within your power and those things that are not within your power. The failure to make this distinction, he taught, is the single, sole source of human misery. The life of Epictetus is a living, breathing proof that the quality of your existence is determined not by the external conditions placed upon you, but by the internal choices you make about those conditions. Now, we must turn our attention to the absolute precision of this dividing line and the uncompromising commitment it requires to transform chaos into tranquility. The immense weight of the Roman Empire could crush a man's body, but it could not touch his mind. The next stage of our journey will explore the definitive principle of this internal revolution, the absolute, non-negotiable dichotomy of control. The quiet, unyielding authority of Epictetus was not born from theory. It was forged by the necessity of survival in a world where everything external could be taken away. This necessity led him to formulate the absolute, non-negotiable first principle of his teaching, the dichotomy of control. This simple, radical distinction is the key to all Stoic peace, and it is the wisdom he dedicated his life to forcing his students to understand, not intellectually, but existentially. The two worlds, inner and outer Epictetus, taught that for any human being to achieve tranquility, ataraxia, and true freedom, the freedom to live a good life regardless of circumstances, they must first divide the universe of experience into two distinct and separate realms. 1. The sphere of control, the inner citadel. This realm contains the only things that truly belong to you, the only things over which you possess absolute sovereignty. Epictetus defined this sphere not as your physical strength or your social status, but as your volition, prohairesis, the faculty of choice, judgment, and intention. Our judgments and opinions, the way we choose to perceive, interpret, and assign value to external events. A sudden downpour is not inherently bad. The judgment that a downpour is a disaster is a choice we make. Our impulses and desires, the inner movement of the soul toward or away from an object. We cannot control the external world, but we control the choice to assent to an impulse. Our moral will and intentions, the decisions we make about how we will act, regardless of what happens to us. If we are insulted, the insult is outside our power, but the decision to respond with reason and dignity is entirely within our power. Epictetus insisted that these internal acts are by nature free, cannot be constrained, and cannot be taken away, even by the most powerful emperor or the most cruel master. This is the inner citadel, the fortress of the soul that is truly impregnable. 2. The sphere of non-control, the external world. This realm contains everything else, the vast, messy, unpredictable universe that operates according to its own laws, entirely independent of your wishes. Epictetus taught that these things are fundamentally indifferent to your morality and your well-being, and must be treated as such. Your body and health. Though you can care for your body, you cannot control whether you get sick, age, or are physically injured, a lesson he learned intimately with his broken leg. Your property and wealth. The external goods that are subject to fortune, theft, government decree, or economic collapse. Your reputation and status. How other people perceive you, praise you, or criticize you. Other people's opinions are solely the property of their own judgments, which you cannot control. The actions of others. The choices, mistakes, and malicious intentions of your friends, family, colleagues, and rulers. Their actions are products of their own volition, which is external to yours. External events, life and death, the course of nature, weather, accidents, and the time of your death. The source of all misery, confusing the two spheres. Epictetus argued that the single, sole source of human unhappiness, anxiety, and frustration is the failure to maintain this clear separation. We suffer because we mistakenly assume that things which are not ours can somehow be controlled, and we fail to invest fully in the only things that are ours. The attachment to the external. When we desperately cling to things in the non-control sphere, our reputation, our health, or the loyalty of a friend, we are setting ourselves up for certain pain. Since these things are transient and subject to fortune, our attachment guarantees that their loss will feel like a catastrophic failure of our world. The neglect of the internal. By focusing our energy on chasing external goods, we neglect the only things that can bring true and lasting goodness, the continuous, rigorous improvement of our moral will. We become experts in acquiring things that can be lost, and amateurs in cultivating the one thing that is eternally secure, our character. Epictetus's message was blunt and uncompromising. Crave only what you can have, desire only what is in your power. Anything you wish to secure permanently must be placed within the confines of your own judgment and action. The practical application, reframing loss, the mastery of the dichotomy of control, is not an academic exercise. It is a daily, demanding spiritual practice. Epictetus gave his students practical methods for internalizing this truth, transforming the experience of loss from a crushing blow into a mere adjustment. He used powerful, evocative analogies to help his students distance themselves emotionally from external possessions. The innkeeper analogy. He taught that you must regard your body, your house, your wealth, and even your family not as your property, but as things given to you by fortune or the universe to use for a time, much like a traveler stays at an inn. When the innkeeper, fortune, asks for them back, you should return them without complaint, remembering that they were never truly yours to begin with. The only thing that truly belongs to you is the attitude with which you return them. The role. Analogy. Life is a dramatic play, the Enchiridion, the 17. You did not choose the role you were assigned, slave, free man, rich, poor, but the quality of your performance, whether you act with integrity, honor, and courage, is entirely up to you. You are responsible only for the performance, not the script. This practice requires a continuous, deliberate act of premeditation, what the Stoics called premeditatio malorum, the conscious rehearsal of potential misfortunes. By contemplating the loss of external goods in advance, we strip the surprise and the shock from the event, allowing reason to remain in command when the loss inevitably occurs. The power of the dichotomy of control lies in its simplicity. By withdrawing all emotional energy and frantic effort from the sphere of non-control, you conserve that energy and redirect it entirely toward the only realm where it can achieve perfect success, the cultivation of your moral self. This redirecting of energy transforms frustration into focused effort, fear into acceptance, and external dependency into internal resilience. The world suddenly becomes less terrifying because you are no longer playing a game you are guaranteed to lose. You are now solely focused on the game you are guaranteed to win, the mastery of your own mind. The distinction between what we can control and what we cannot, the dichotomy of control, is the necessary map, but a map alone cannot win the war. Epictetus knew that to achieve inner sovereignty, his students needed a systematic training regimen, a daily military-grade practice to ensure that reason remained the commander of the soul. He formalized this training into the 3 disciplines, or topoi, which encompass the entire work of philosophy. Discipline 1, the art of assent, dealing with impressions. This is the most fundamental and crucial discipline, the training that must be mastered before any true progress can be made. It addresses the central challenge of human experience, impressions, phantasias. An impression is the raw, unadorned sensory data that streams into our awareness, the sight of a lost wallet, the sound of a harsh criticism, the feeling of physical pain. The problem, Epictetus taught, is not the impression itself, but the immediate reflexive assent we give to it. The reflexive error. When we see a critic frown, the automatic unexamined impression that flashes in our mind is, I am insulted and this is terrible. When we feel pain, the automatic impression is, this is unbearable suffering. We instantly conflate the mere fact, a frown, a pain, with a value judgment, insulting, unbearable. This reflexive assent is the entry point of misery, the pause, and the test. Epictetus demanded that his students learn to establish a critical pause between the initial impression and the final assent. The key is to force the mind to stop and subject every incoming impression to a rigorous philosophical test. He famously taught the simple mantra for this moment of pause. Stop and say, you are but an impression, and not at all the thing you appear to be. The judgment of control. Once paused, the student must apply the dichotomy of control. Is this impression about something within my power or outside it? Impression. My reputation is being attacked by this gossip. Test. Is my reputation something I can control? No, it belongs to the judgments of others. Result. The initial impression must be rejected, and the mind must return to what is controllable, the moral choice to not react with anger or distress. This discipline requires the student to become an unwavering sentinel at the gates of their mind, never allowing an unexamined negative value judgment to sneak past. The goal is the ultimate prize of Stoicism, certainty, the absolute conviction that nothing external can shake your inner core. Discipline 2. The discipline of desire and aversion, managing wants. The second discipline moves from managing thoughts to managing the fundamental driving forces of the soul. Desire, the impulse to pursue something, and aversion, the impulse to avoid something. This discipline is centered on the understanding of the cosmic order and the principle of acceptance. Correcting desire. Epictetus instructed his students to attach their desires only to things within their control, the development of virtue, the correct use of impressions. He warned that desiring anything external, health, wealth, or a specific outcome in a public event, is a guaranteed path to frustration and fear, because the universe may decide otherwise. He taught, if you desire anything which is not in your own power, you must necessarily be disappointed. Correcting aversion. Similarly, aversion, the impulse to avoid things, must only be directed toward things that are truly bad, which in Stoicism means only moral error, vice, lack of discipline, poor judgment. We naturally fear poverty, death, or physical pain, but these are external indifference. Directing aversion toward them means you live in continuous fear, as they are inevitable. Instead, direct aversion toward malice, envy, and irrationality, the only things truly destructive to the moral self. This discipline provides the emotional anchor of the philosophy. By harmonizing our desires with the way the world actually works, acceptance of the cosmic order, we achieve tranquility, ataraxia, the freedom from emotional disturbance. Discipline 3, the discipline of action, fulfilling duties. The third discipline moves outward, guiding the individual's interaction with the external world and other people. This discipline is the moral engine of the philosophy, focused on duty, justice, and social responsibility. The principle of roles. Epictetus reminded his students that life requires them to play many roles: a son, a father, a neighbor, a citizen, a philosopher. Each role comes with specific, natural duties, katakonta. The work of this discipline is to determine through reason what these duties are and to fulfill them with integrity and rationality. Example, if you are a father, your duty is to care for your children. If you are a citizen, your duty is to respect the laws and contribute to the community. The importance of intention, not outcome. Crucially, this discipline is still subject to the dichotomy of control. You are required to perform the duty, the intention and effort which are controllable, but you must remain indifferent to the result, the outcome, which is not controllable. You must strive to save your friend from danger, duty, but you must accept it with serenity If your friend dies despite your best efforts, outcome. The moral success lies entirely in the purity of the intention and the effort. Living with others. This discipline provides the framework for navigating the messy reality of human relationships. Epictetus taught that when dealing with an angry, irrational, or ungrateful person, we must remind ourselves that they are acting according to their own incorrect judgments, which is outside our power. We should feel pity for their confusion rather than anger at their actions. Our duty remains to respond with patience and reason, recognizing the fundamental human condition. The philosopher, as the physicians of the soul Epictetus, viewed the three disciplines not as separate exercises, but as an interlocking system designed to transform the student from a fragile emotional reactor into a durable, rational agent. He often likened the philosopher to a physician. The philosopher's task is not to offer soothing words or distracting comforts, but to perform a diagnostic and corrective surgery on the soul. The discourses are filled with his sharp, demanding questions, designed to expose the student's weaknesses and force them to confront the contradictions between their stated beliefs and their emotional reactions. If a student complained about being insulted, Epictetus would retort, "If someone succeeded in provoking you, realize that your mind has assented to the impression. The fault is not with the insulter, but with the failure of the sentinel at the gate." If a student complained about being poor, he would ask, "Do you have a use for money that cannot be satisfied by reason alone?" The goal of this intensive training was to create the Socratic man, the self-examined individual who achieves happiness through self-sufficiency and moral consistency. By diligently practicing the three disciplines, the student learns to reserve their efforts for the battle they can win, the inner life, and to accept with dignity the events they cannot change, the outer world. The entire system ultimately revolves around the continuous application of the pause, the crucial moment between the initial impression and the final assent. This moment is the only place where true freedom resides. This is the inner life Epictetus cultivated in chains, and which he now offered as the highest form of sovereignty to the rulers of Rome. Having established the absolute boundary of the self through the dichotomy of control and the daily training of the three disciplines, Epictetus then elevates the student's perspective. He forces them to look beyond the immediate anxiety of their personal life and contemplate the vast, intricate system of the universe itself. This is the crucial step that transforms Stoicism from a mere philosophy of endurance into a robust, ethical worldview rooted in profound acceptance and social duty. The rationality of the cosmos, providence. At the heart of Epictetus's teaching, and indeed all Stoicism, lies a radical belief. The universe is not a chaotic, indifferent mechanism, but a living, rational organism governed by an intelligent, benevolent force the Stoics called providence, pronoia, or the universal logos, reason. The world as a system. Epictetus insisted that every event, from the rising of the sun to the most painful personal loss, is an integral component of a vast, perfect, and logical system. Nothing happens outside the will of this rational cosmic order. Therefore, to complain about any event is not merely a sign of frustration. It is an act of irrationality and hubris. It is arguing with the divine structure of the universe itself, the good of the whole. If the universe is perfectly rational, then everything that happens, including what appears harmful to the individual, must contribute to the greater good of the whole. The death of a loved one, the loss of wealth, or the onset of illness are not arbitrary cruelties. They are necessary links in the immense chain of cause and effect required for the system to continue its perfect functioning. The test of the soul. Epictetus taught that negative events are not obstacles, they are opportunities. They are the universe presenting us with the specific circumstances required to practice and prove our virtue. Just as a wrestler needs an opponent to practice his skill, a Stoic needs adversity to practice patience, courage, and tranquility. When misfortune strikes, the true philosopher does not ask, "Why me?" but rather, "What is the universe asking me to do with this situation?" This perspective, often called the view from above, dissolves anxiety by demonstrating that nothing fundamentally wrong can ever happen. Only things that are necessary can happen. The duty of absolute acceptance, amor fati. The belief in the rationality of the cosmos leads to the profound ethical requirement of absolute acceptance, amor fati, love of fate. The folly of complaint. If you accept that the universe is governed by perfect reason, then the only rational response to any external event is a serene, unreserved yes. Complaining is an act of folly because it is an attempt to alter an event that has already occurred and an insult to the rational order that determined it. The Master's Decree. Epictetus framed this acceptance in stark personal terms, sometimes referencing his slave background to drive the point home. He taught that we must approach the events of life as if they were decrees from a benevolent master, Providence. The rational person says, "I will do what I am told," without resistance. The irrational person says, "I wish it were different." Harmonizing the will. The highest possible achievement for a human being is to harmonize their personal will with the universal will, the Logos. When our desires match what the universe delivers, we achieve perfect peace. We stop trying to change the script of the drama and instead focus solely on performing the role assigned to us with excellence. This is the freedom found in chains, the realization that true power lies not in controlling the vast external world, but in controlling the one thing that can resist it, the stubborn, irrational complaint of the self. The philosophy of social connection, oikeiosis. A frequent criticism leveled at Stoicism is that the pursuit of personal tranquility and detachment from external things must lead to selfish isolation and a neglect of social duty. Epictetus vehemently refuted this. The very rationality of the cosmos demands the deepest commitment to humanity. The rational animal. Epictetus taught that the human being is defined by two fundamental qualities, reason and sociability. We are rational animals made for community. Just as a foot is designed to work with the leg, the human is designed to work within the larger system of society. The hierarchy of connection, oikeiosis. The Stoic doctrine of oikeiosis, appropriation or affinity, explains this duty. It describes the natural process of expanding our circle of concern. We are born self-centered, but reason teaches us to expand our affection and duty outward, from self to immediate family, to neighbors, to citizens, and finally to all humankind, the cosmopolis. Justice as rational action. Therefore, acting with justice, fairness, and benevolence is not an optional virtue. It is a rational necessity. When a man acts unjustly toward another, he is not merely harming his neighbor. He is acting against his own rational nature and the fundamental design of the cosmos. He is, in effect, mutilating his own soul. Duty versus outcome, revisited. This social duty is still governed by the dichotomy of control. We must do everything in our power to act justly, care for our family, and help our community. Action, intention, controllable. However, we must accept the outcome if our efforts fail, or if the community remains ungrateful. Outcome, non-controllable. The success of the action lies solely in the moral integrity of the effort. The true meaning of indifference. This commitment to social duty clarifies the Stoic term indifference. Things like family, health, and wealth are not indifferent in the sense that they are worthless, but indifferent in the sense that they have no bearing on the moral purity of the soul. Preferred indifference. Epictetus acknowledged that some indifference, like health, education, and having a good family, are preferred. We should rationally pursue and utilize these things because they make it easier to practice virtue and fulfill our duties. The moral test. However, if the pursuit of a preferred indifferent, e.g., wealth, requires a violation of virtue, e.g., lying, the indifferent must be immediately abandoned. The moral choice, virtue, is always the superior good, the only thing that is inherently beneficial. By weaving the individual pursuit of tranquility, disciplines 1 and 2, with the universal demand for social responsibility, discipline 3, Epictetus creates a philosophy that is both inwardly resilient and outwardly engaged. The individual finds peace by realizing they are a rational fragment of a divine whole, and their highest purpose is to act in a way that honors that perfect, rational design. The transition from intellectual understanding to embodied wisdom is the most difficult journey in philosophy. Epictetus understood that his students, many of whom were high-ranking or ambitious Romans, faced relentless pressure to conform to the world's values, wealth, reputation, and power. He provided them with two critical tools to maintain their moral consistency in a corrupt world: the concept of the role and the practice of spiritual exercise. Defining the role, prosopon. Epictetus taught that life is a drama, and every individual is assigned a role, prosopon. This concept is crucial for bridging the gap between internal tranquility and external duty. The assigned script. You did not choose the script, whether you are a slave or an emperor, rich or poor, healthy or sick. This is the realm of the non-controllable. The moral performance. Your entire duty, the entirety of your controllable will, is to perform the role assigned to you with excellence, dignity, and moral integrity. The success of the drama does not depend on the grandness of the role, but on the quality of the performance. The courage of consistency. To an ambitious Roman, the role of a consul might seem inherently superior to the role of a teacher or a citizen. Epictetus countered this by insisting that the only true failure is performing your assigned role badly, that is, failing to meet the moral duties of that role with rationality and justice. If you are a father, your duty is to care for your child. If you are a citizen, your duty is to respect the law and contribute to the common good. You fulfill the role perfectly the moment you intend to act virtuously, regardless of the outcome. The philosopher's role. For his serious students, Epictetus demanded they adopt the role of the philosopher. This role comes with the highest duty, to live in absolute consistency with the principles of reason, to be immune to flattery and ridicule, and to serve as a living, visible example of inner freedom. He often said that the philosopher is the physician of the soul, and just as a doctor cannot treat others while being sick himself, the student cannot guide others while being corrupted by material desires. The challenge of public opinion and ridicule. The moment a student attempted to live by Stoic principles, rejecting excessive luxury, maintaining composure in the face of insult, and prioritizing character over reputation, they instantly became targets for ridicule from their peers. This societal pressure, Epictetus knew, was often a greater threat to moral consistency than any physical danger. The fear of appearance. Most people are slaves to external appearances. They live to manage the opinions of others. This makes them perpetually unhappy because the judgments of others are entirely outside their control. The immunity of the soul. Epictetus taught that the true philosopher must become immune to ridicule. If someone insults you, they are merely voicing their opinion, which is a judgment external to you. If the insult is false, why should you be bothered by another person's ignorance? If the insult is true, you are bad-tempered, you should be grateful for the diagnosis and work to correct the fault, but not feel emotional distress. If a man tells you that you have the smell of a goat, do not get angry, but ask yourself if the statement is true. Welcoming scorn. In fact, the philosopher should welcome scorn, as it serves as a powerful test of their progress. If you can maintain tranquility and good humor when publicly mocked for your chosen path, you have proven that your happiness is internally sourced and truly secure. Ridicule, therefore, becomes a tool for self-assessment. The necessity of spiritual exercise, ascesis. To maintain this moral consistency in the face of corruption and ridicule, the Stoic needed more than mere memory of the principles. They needed relentless, daily practice. This is the concept of ascesis, the spiritual exercise or training that makes philosophy a way of life, not just a subject of discussion. The athlete of virtue. Epictetus often compared the student of philosophy to an Olympic athlete. An athlete doesn't train only on the day of the competition. They train rigorously every day. Similarly, the student must train the mind daily to ensure that the principles of reason are instantly accessible when crisis strikes. The spiritual exercises. This training involves specific, repeated mental exercises, morning meditation, the plan. Start the day by planning how you will use your impressions correctly. I may meet a difficult person today. I may lose my money. What will I do if this happens? Evening reflection, the review. End the day by reviewing every action. Where did I fall short today? Did I give assent to a negative impression? Did I fail to perform my duty? This rigorous, non-judgmental accountability is vital for correcting errors before they become habits. Premeditation of evils, premeditatio malorum. Actively rehearse potential misfortunes, the loss of a loved one, imprisonment, or physical harm. The goal is to strip the shock and terror from the event, ensuring that when it occurs, you can meet it with the calm, rational response of a person prepared. This practice transforms fear into practical acceptance. The inner dialogue and the voice of the logos. The ultimate tool in ascesis is the constant internal dialogue, the continuous conversation between the emotional, automatic self and the rational, philosophical self. Interrupting the passion. When a strong passion, anger, desire, or fear arises, the student must immediately employ the voice of reason to interrupt the passion's momentum. The emotional voice. I must have that new position, or I will be miserable. The rational voice. Stop. You are seeking something that is external, transient, and dependent on others. To seek it is to place your happiness outside your control, or refuse to give assent to this desire, the God within. Epictetus often reminded his students that there is a divine fragment within them, a piece of the logos, universal reason, that resides in the human soul. To act with reason, justice, and kindness is to live in accordance with this divine spark. To act with passion, fear, or malice is to desecrate this inner divinity. This belief provides the ultimate motivation for moral consistency. You are not just striving for personal peace, but for alignment with the highest nature of the cosmos. By relentlessly practicing these spiritual exercises and defining their life through the duties of their role, the student of Epictetus transformed their entire existence into a testament to virtue. They learned that external success, wealth, or imperial favor was not merely irrelevant. It was a distraction from the only true work, the lifelong construction of the inner citadel. The life of Epictetus unfolded during one of the most volatile periods of the Roman Empire, a time ruled by unpredictable and often brutal emperors like Nero and Domitiano. This political environment made the practice of Stoicism far more than an academic pursuit. It was an act of political survival and moral resistance. Epictetus's philosophy provided a complete manual for dealing with arbitrary power and injustice, teaching that the tyrant's authority, vast as it was, could never extend to the one place that truly mattered, the moral will of the individual. The reality of tyranny, external indifference. Epictetus directly addressed the greatest fears of the Roman elite: exile, imprisonment, confiscation of property, and execution. He reminded his students, many of whom served in the government, that these events, though terrifying, belong entirely to the realm of the external world, the sphere of non-control. Property and status. The tyrant can seize your wealth, banish you from Rome, and strip you of your senatorial rank. Epictetus taught that these are simply the tyrant playing his role in the cosmic drama. Since these are indifferents, their loss cannot diminish your true worth or your capacity for virtue. He often challenged his students: if you lose your toga, have you lost your soul? If you are exiled, have you lost your ability to reason? The answer was unequivocally no. The powerless tyrant. The power of the tyrant is vast, but it is circumscribed by the body. A tyrant can order you to be tortured or killed, but he cannot compel you to believe that the torture is truly bad, nor can he force you to compromise your principles. The tyrant controls the flesh, but not the assent of the mind. Epictetus declared that the tyrant is only formidable to those who value the things the tyrant can grant: money, status, and fear the things the tyrant can take away: life, comfort. The true philosopher, valuing only virtue, leaves the tyrant entirely powerless. This view was not theoretical. It was proven by the famous Stoic and Cynic martyrs of the time, men like Epictetus and Helvidio Prisco, who chose principled death over corrupt submission to Emperor Nero, becoming heroic figures who demonstrated that virtue is truly the only unassailable good. Exile and expulsion, the philosophical journey. The political friction between the free, self-examining spirit of Stoicism and the absolute authority of the emperors often led to open conflict. In 92 Common Era, Emperor Domitiano, deeply insecure and paranoid about intellectual descent, issued a sweeping decree expelling all philosophers from Rome. Epictetus's response. For Epictetus, this exile was a perfect test of his own teaching. He did not rail against the injustice, he simply relocated his school. The change of location from the heart of the capital to the quiet city of Nicopolis in Epiro was seen not as a punishment, but as a neutral change of scenery. His teaching was not dependent on the geography of Rome, but on the presence of his own rational will. His philosophy traveled with him, a broader audience. Ironically, the exile broadened his influence. Nicopolis became a philosophical pilgrimage site, attracting students from across the Mediterranean who sought the quiet, uncompromising wisdom of the Stoic master. He demonstrated that true philosophy does not need an academy or a palace. It only needs a committed mind. Exile, a terrible fate for a Roman senator, was merely an external inconvenience for the philosopher. The highest courage, facing death with equanimity. The ultimate test of Stoic progress is the ability to face death, or mors, with tranquility, euthymia. Epictetus taught that fear of death is simply the irrational judgment that death is bad. By applying the dichotomy of control, we dismantle this fear. The natural process. Death is the ultimate external event, a natural, inevitable process governed by the logos. To fear it is to fear the universe itself. The philosopher accepts death as the necessary dissolution of the body back into the material elements of the cosmos. The moral completion. For the Stoic, the only legitimate concern is whether one has lived one's life well, that is, virtuously. If you have used your volition correctly and fulfilled your duty with reason, then your life is complete, regardless of its length. The philosopher approaches death not with dread, but with the satisfaction of a craftsman whose work is finished. Epictetus often used the analogy of a festival. Life is a festival to which you have been invited. When the host, Providence, signals that it is time to leave, you leave without complaint, grateful for the experience, not clinging frantically to stay. This willingness to die rather than compromise one's moral integrity is the non-negotiable boundary of Stoicism. It is the final defense against tyranny. The tyrant can threaten your life, but the philosopher can render that threat meaningless by valuing virtue more than life itself. When life is held as an indifference secondary to virtue, the moral victory is always assured. The later influence on the good emperors. While Epictetus had suffered under the tyranny of Domitiano, his teachings played a pivotal role in shaping the era of the so-called Five Good Emperors, demonstrating the profound potential of Stoicism to improve governance. Direct influence. Though Epictetus died before the reigns of many of these emperors, his teaching became the de facto philosophical guide for the upper echelons of Roman society. His students carried his uncompromising ethical demands into the Senate and the imperial administration. The ultimate success, Marcus Aurelius. The most famous and enduring testament to Epictetus's success came a generation later with Marco Aurelio, who was not just an admirer, but a dedicated student of the Stoic tradition. Marco Aurelio's meditations are essentially an internal, private dialogue with the very principles of Epictetus's manual, the dichotomy of control, the three disciplines, and the acceptance of the cosmic order. Marco Aurelio, the most powerful man in the world, routinely reminded himself in his private diary to think like the crippled slave philosopher, proving that the true source of authority lay not in the imperial throne, but in the inner citadel that Epictetus had built. The emperor sought guidance from the slave, showing that philosophical truth transcended all social and political hierarchies. The legacy of Epictetus thus provided the intellectual foundation for an enlightened form of governance that sought justice, duty, and rationality. The very virtues he taught were essential for the cosmopolis. The uncompromising role of the teacher Epictetus throughout his life lived the uncompromising role of the Stoic teacher he prescribed for his students. He remained poor, living in a simple, sparse dwelling, emphasizing the complete detachment from material possessions. Simplicity and consistency. His personal effects were famously few: a small lamp, a simple bed, and a cloak. When his iron lamp was once stolen, he bought an inexpensive clay replacement. When a student expressed shock, Epictetus stated that the thief was the one suffering, as they had exchanged a material object for the moral vice of theft. His physical life was a living manifestation of his philosophy. Nothing external was important enough to disturb his tranquility. The test of the student. He often drove away students who were not serious, demanding that philosophy was not a hobby, but a vocation that required complete transformation. He would ask them, "Why are you still talking about what is good and bad? Show me in your life. Stop talking like a philosopher and start acting like one." This fierce commitment to moral integrity in the face of political terror and social pressure is the enduring lesson of Epictetus's life. He proved that the only power worth cultivating is the power over one's own mind, a sovereignty no emperor could grant and no tyrant could take away. The physical chains of his youth were replaced by the unshakable freedom of his soul, a freedom he now offered to all who were willing to pay the price of rigorous self-discipline. The grand theories of the dichotomy of control and the cosmic order find their most profound and difficult test in the messy, chaotic reality of human emotion. Epictetus was not merely a theorist, he was a psychologist of the soul, offering brutal yet compassionate guidance on how to manage the most powerful and destructive passions that threaten the inner citadel: grief, anger, and excessive desire. He taught that these emotions are not external diseases, but errors of judgment originating entirely within our own minds. The illusion of anger is, perhaps, the most explosive and immediately destructive passion. Epictetus taught that anger is always rooted in a single, simple delusion: the belief that an external event or another person's action has done us real, fundamental harm. The diagnosis of disappointment. Anger arises when our will is obstructed. If we wish the door to close quietly and someone slams it, the anger is born from the frustrated desire that the non-controllable world, the other person's actions, should conform to our internal wishes. Epictetus insists this is irrational because the actions of others are their own business, part of their own volition, and therefore entirely outside our control. The projection of evil. The person who angers us has not actually harmed us. They have harmed their own moral will. By acting foolishly or maliciously, they are the ones suffering a moral error. Our anger is simply the irrational choice to assign the moral quality of evil to an event, the slight or the mistake, that is actually an indifferent. The only true evil is the moral corruption of our own will. The tool of the rational response. When someone acts badly, Epictetus prescribed a rational response rooted in pity, not rage. We must remind ourselves that the person is acting according to their own incorrect judgments, which is a pitiable state of confusion. We should respond as a doctor responds to a patient in delirium, with patience and clarity, recognizing that the disease is the problem, not the patient. The practice of detachment. Epictetus demanded that his students become masters of the premeditation of anger. When going out into the world, we must assume that we will encounter rude, irritating, and irrational people because that is the natural, inevitable condition of the world. By accepting this reality in advance, the event of the insult becomes merely a confirmation of expectation, not a surprise to be raged against. Anger thus becomes a choice, and the rational agent chooses peace. The challenge of grief and affection. Dealing with loss, the death of a child, the departure of a friend, the end of a relationship, is arguably the most demanding test of the Stoic soul. Epictetus's teaching here is often perceived as cold or heartless, but he argues it is the only path to true, sustainable compassion. The nature of attachment. Grief is the natural consequence of attaching our inner peace to things that are external and temporary. We suffer because we treat a gift from the universe, a child, a friend, as an eternal possession. The innkeeper analogy. Revisited. He urged students to maintain a constant, rational consciousness of the transient nature of all external beings. When you embrace your child or kiss your wife, Epictetus taught, you must whisper to yourself, tomorrow you may be dead. This is not morbid. It is realistic gratitude. You are fully engaging with the beloved person now, while simultaneously preparing your mind for the inevitable moment when the universe reclaims what was never truly yours. The Stoic definition of love. True love, in the Stoic sense, is not based on clinging to the external presence of the other person, but on the rational appreciation of their virtuous soul. If your love is rational, then the death of the person should cause sorrow, the initial, natural propatheia, or emotional stirring, but not devastating, long-lasting grief, because the love itself, the appreciation of virtue, remains with you, untouchable by death. The duty of the role. When tragedy strikes, Epictetus reminded his students of their role. If you are a father and your child dies, you must perform the duties of the father. You must care for the funeral rites and mourn with appropriate, controlled sorrow. But you must not act the role of a woman in tragedy, as he put it, referring to the exaggerated lamentations common in his era, indulging in excessive, self-pitying displays of grief. You must remember that you are a human being and a Stoic student, acting as a rational fragment of the Logos. Epictetus taught that we should not seek to suppress the initial emotional stirrings, which are natural and unavoidable, but we must refuse to assent to the judgment that the loss is a catastrophe that invalidates our life. The death of a person is an event. The moral failure is the irrational judgment that follows it. The management of desire and luxury. Epictetus lived a life of extraordinary material simplicity, deliberately removing the temptations of luxury to simplify the work of his discipline of desire. The freedom from want. He taught that the only path to true wealth is not increasing possessions, but decreasing wants. The man who desires nothing external is the richest man in the world, because his happiness cannot be impoverished by fortune. The danger of habit. Epictetus warned that most desires become destructive through habit. We do not naturally crave elaborate banquets or expensive clothing. We condition ourselves to need them. Once these habits are formed, they become internal masters, turning the supposedly free man into an appetitive slave. The necessity of hardship, ascesis. He encouraged his students to practice voluntary discomfort, sleeping on a hard surface, wearing simple clothes, fasting occasionally. This practice, a key part of ascesis, is not intended as self-punishment, but as inoculation. It teaches the body and the mind that they can endure the loss of comfort without panic, ensuring that if poverty or hardship ever strikes, the mind remains resilient and self-sufficient. This preparedness is the ultimate psychological insurance against the tyranny of desire, the ethical dimension of want. Furthermore, Epictetus taught that excessive desire is not just personally destructive, it is antisocial. The man who desperately craves money or power will inevitably be tempted to acquire it unjustly, harming the community and violating the principle of justice inherent in the cosmic order. The disciplined Stoic, by minimizing personal want, becomes a more trustworthy and just citizen. The masterpiece of self-correction. The entire process of managing passion, be it anger, grief, or desire, is summarized by Epictetus in the required practice of self-correction. He insisted that the student must never tolerate an error in judgment. When you find yourself angry or sorrowful, you must stop, acknowledge the failure, and immediately apply the remedy, the dichotomy of control. Where did I assign value to an indifferent? Where did I assume control over the uncontrollable? Where did I forget that I am merely an actor playing a role? This process of rigorous, non-judgmental accountability is vital. Failure is not the catastrophe. The catastrophe is the refusal to learn from the failure. The philosopher is the only true professional, constantly honing the one skill that truly matters, the skill of living well. By treating every emotional failure as an opportunity for immediate, rational correction, the student transforms destructive passion into the raw material for moral progress. The inner citadel is not built in a day, but through the daily, disciplined repair of the inevitable cracks. The discourses recorded by Ariano offer us the vivid, argumentative, and demanding voice of Epictetus in the lecture hall. But recognizing the profound human need for immediate, actionable guidance, Ariano compiled a concise, distilled version of his master's core teachings. This resulted in the Enchiridion, the manual or handbook, a text so powerful and direct that it became the essential pocket guide for Stoics, including the emperor Marco Aurelio. This work moves the philosophy out of the abstract classroom and into the chaotic, moment-to-moment reality of daily life, transforming grand cosmic theory into concrete, personal rules. The power of the pocket guide. The very purpose of the Enchiridion is to provide the student with spiritual axioms, short, memorable rules that can be recalled instantly when an impression, fantasia, strikes and threatens to derail reason. The philosophy must be immediately at hand, like a soldier's weapon, ready for deployment in the battle of the mind. Epictetus recognized that the human being is prone to forgetting the dichotomy of control precisely when it is needed most, in moments of intense fear, desire, or anger. The manual acts as a constant, severe reminder, forcing the student to apply the logic of rational self-interest to every mundane task. Rule of ownership. The opening line of the manual forcefully reestablishes the boundary. Some things are up to us, and some things are not up to us. All subsequent rules flow directly from the correct, rigorous application of this single principle. Any deviation from this line is deemed a philosophical failure, the use of things. He demanded that students view every external object, wealth, health, and social event, as a tool to be used virtuously, not as an end to be possessed. If you go to a market, your purpose is not to acquire things, but to maintain your moral will in the face of temptation, rudeness, and distraction, controlling speech and silence. Epictetus was acutely aware of the danger of unexamined speech. He taught that chatter is the enemy of self-mastery because it externalizes our focus and exposes our inner, undisciplined thoughts to the unpredictable judgments of others. The priority of silence. The philosopher, especially the novice, must practice silence as a form of intellectual and moral hygiene. When you are silent, you are reserving your energy for the internal work, the critical examination of your own impressions. When you speak, you are spending that energy on the non-controllable world. The test of speech. When speech is necessary, he sets strict, memorable guidelines. Avoid gossip and trivialities. Never speak about trivial subjects like races, gladiators, or the private affairs of others. These conversations are a waste of precious time and energy, and they distract from the only worthy subject, the improvement of one's own character. Be brief and essential. If you must speak, let your words be few, essential, and non-judgmental. Avoid laughing too often or excessively, as this betrays a lack of serious composure. Speak only of the controllable. The highest form of conversation is to speak only of things that pertain to the moral quality of the soul, of duty, justice, and the rational application of principles. If others begin to speak of externals, Epictetus advised the student to simply remain silent, or gently steer the conversation back to philosophical principles, but without arrogance or preaching. If you have an opinion on what is happening, keep it to yourself. This discipline of the tongue and the commitment to silence is a direct mechanism for withdrawing from the chaotic external world and fortifying the inner life. The scrutiny of social engagements. The manual provides highly specific, sometimes severe instructions on navigating the Roman social environment, particularly banquets and public baths, the two major arenas of temptation and external judgment. Bathing and simple needs. When going to the public baths, the student must rehearse the possible external annoyances, the crowds, the splashing, the petty thieves. If your clothing is stolen, the internal response must be immediate and correct. The loss is an indifferent. The only thing truly stolen is the judgment of the thief, which is his own problem. The loss of a cloak cannot justify the loss of your tranquility, the only thing truly valuable. Conduct at banquets. Banquets were centers of social climbing, flattery, and excess. Epictetus advised the student to behave as a guest at an unexpected feast. You do not demand a particular dish or seating. You accept what is offered. You should eat and drink in moderation, maintaining mental clarity so you can observe your own impulses and the folly of others. Your purpose is not gluttony or social gain. Your purpose is to use the event as a proving ground for discipline. The avoidance of contagion. He warned that associating with the morally weak is like sharing a disease. If you spend time with a complaining, gossiping person, you will inevitably be dragged down by their negativity and irrationality. The philosopher must choose their companions carefully, or practice internal separation, maintaining their own rational composure even in the midst of irrational company, remembering that the other person's poor judgment is their own burden to carry. The radical acceptance of loss and death. The Enchiridion dedicates several memorable passages to dismantling the fear of loss and death, making the abstract concept of indifference brutally concrete. Your child, your property. When facing the potential loss of a loved one, the manual demands that you think of them precisely as they are, a mortal human being. If your child dies, the correct statement is not, "Alas, I have lost my son, but I have returned alone." The child was a gift from Providence, to be enjoyed and cherished for a time, but never truly owned. The fragility of the soul body. When anticipating old age or disease, Epictetus instructs the student to remember that the body is merely a piece of clay, destined to return to the earth. To fear its decay is to argue with the most fundamental law of nature, logos. The only thing you can control is the rational spirit that inhabits the body while it remains. The final curtain. The most powerful image is that of the actor leaving the stage. Death is simply the stage manager informing you that your time is up. Whether you played a short minor role or a long major role is irrelevant. What matters is that you played the role well, with virtue, dignity, and integrity. The wise man is ready to leave at any moment without clinging or complaint. The uncompromising self-assessment. The manual concludes with a clear, uncompromising demand. Make philosophy your primary lifelong business. The two voices. You must commit to becoming two people, the irrational, automatic self and the rational, judgmental self that corrects it. You must tolerate no hypocrisy. If you say you believe in the dichotomy of control, then you must act that way when your possessions are stolen. The moment you act differently, you expose yourself as a fraud, undermining your own moral progress. The inner vow. Epictetus believed that if a person truly commits to these few, simple rules, if they internalize the fact that only their moral will is good, they will achieve a state of freedom and tranquility that surpasses the power of any king or emperor. This freedom is entirely self-made, a personal creation secured within the inner citadel. The Enchiridion is the distillation of this wisdom, a set of instructions designed to create a person who is impervious to external events and whose inner life is a continuous stream of rational action and serene acceptance. It is a handbook for the ultimate journey, the journey into the sovereignty of the self. The entire rigorous system taught by Epictetus, the dichotomy of control, the three disciplines, and the rules of the Enchiridion, was not an end in itself. These were merely the tools for achieving the final, highest state of human existence, moral integrity, eustathia, and tranquility, ataraxia. This final stage is the complete fusion of the self with the rational order of the cosmos, making the philosopher a living embodiment of reason and courage. The final barrier, conquering the fear of death. True tranquility is impossible, while the fear of death, mors, remains a governing force in the mind. Epictetus taught that confronting and neutralizing this fear is the ultimate act of philosophical liberation. If the fear of death persists, the tyrant still holds sway and the moral will remains compromised. Death as a fact of nature. Epictetus stripped death of its terror by reducing it to its true, neutral status, a natural, inevitable transition. It is merely the dissolution of the body back into the material elements of the universe, governed by the same logos that governs the rising of the sun. He often posed the question, where is the evil in a change that is inherent in the nature of the cosmos? The folly of premature grief. We often suffer more from the imagined fear of death than from death itself. We spend our lives dreading an event that may or may not happen tomorrow, wasting our ability to use the present moment virtuously. Epictetus insisted that our power of choice, prohairesis, is available only now. The rational person commits their entire focus to the present moment, leaving the future, including death, entirely to providence. The completed life. The wise person views their life not as a length of time, but as a completed work. A short life lived virtuously is infinitely more valuable than a long life lived in vice and fear. The moment death arrives, the Stoic should be able to say, I have lived as reason demanded, and depart with gratitude and serenity like a guest leaving a banquet. The integrity of the performance is the only measure that matters. The test of the mind. The man who is truly ready to die is the man who is truly free to live. If you have accepted that death is an external indifferent, you are immune to the threats of any tyrant, any disease, or any loss. This final, unshakable acceptance is the seal of the philosophical character. Avoiding the snare of misanthropy. The rigorous internal focus of Stoicism, the detachment from the outcomes of others' actions, and the emphasis on one's own moral will, often raises the concern that the philosopher might become cold, detached, or misanthropic, hating humanity. Epictetus emphatically warned against this error, asserting that it is a failure of reason. The social imperative. As established in the oikeiosis doctrine, the human being is a social and rational animal. To withdraw from society or to actively hate one's fellow man is to act contrary to nature and the logos. It is a philosophical self-mutilation, rational compassion. When faced with the malice, folly, or irrationality of others, the Stoic does not react with anger, which is an error of judgment, nor with hatred, which is a moral vice. Instead, they respond with rational compassion. They understand that the person acting wrongly is suffering from the greatest possible misfortune, ignorance of the good. They are pitiable, not detestable. Epictetus taught, when a man does you a wrong, immediately consider what judgment he holds about good or evil that led him to do wrong. By viewing the fault as an intellectual error, the natural emotion becomes pity, not rage. The duty of assistance. The philosopher's duty is always to act justly and benevolently toward others, not because the outcome is guaranteed, but because the act itself is virtuous and rational. If we see a man stumbling, we try to help him up. If he refuses, we accept his choice, but our duty to try remains intact. The Stoic is fiercely committed to justice and benevolence in the realm of their own action, even when the world fails to reciprocate. The relationship with the divine, the God within. Epictetus's philosophy places a deep, personal emphasis on the individual's relationship with the divine, providence ish logos, transforming Stoicism into a profoundly spiritual discipline. Fragment of the logos. He constantly reminded his students that their rational faculty, prohairesis, is not merely human, it is a fragment of the divine logos, a piece of Zeus placed within the human soul. This is the source of our inherent dignity and our ultimate worth. Worship through action. The highest form of worship is not ritual sacrifice, but living in perfect accordance with reason and nature, to live justly, to use impressions correctly, and to accept fate with serenity. These are the ways we honor the divine fragment within us. To act with malice, fear, or irrational passion is to blaspheme the God within. The unwavering vow. The philosopher makes a lifelong vow to the divine, a promise to use their volition exactly as providence intended, rationally and virtuously. This vow is the final source of inner strength. When faced with a difficult choice, the Stoic asks, what would a rational, benevolent agent, what would the fragment of God within me choose to do in this situation? The answer provides absolute moral certainty, the creation of the philosophical character. The ultimate goal of the ascesis, the spiritual training, is the complete and permanent installation of the philosophical character. This character is marked by several defining traits, apathy and path. The final goal is apathy, or apatheia, which does not mean lack of feeling, but freedom from destructive passion, pathos. The Stoic retains the capacity for natural, rational emotions, eupatheiai, joy, caution, and wishing, rational desire, but has eliminated unnatural, irrational passions, lust, excessive grief, and anger. Elegance of simplicity. The philosopher's life should be marked by profound simplicity and consistency. They should require very little from the external world, ensuring their happiness is not compromised by a sudden change in fortune. This simplicity is an outward sign of inner wealth. The constant test. The true philosophical character is recognized by their unvarying reaction to extremes. When praised, they are not elated, because praise is external and fleeting. When insulted or disgraced, they are not distressed, because insult is external and irrelevant. The emotional graph of their life is a flat line of serenity, maintained by the constant, rigorous application of reason. The life of Epictetus himself served as the living manual for this character. His poverty, his limp, his exile, and his demanding instruction all testified to the power of a single, rational mind to defy the chaos of the world and achieve a state of unshakable sovereignty. He proved that the crippling circumstances of slavery can become the very foundation of the highest freedom. The legacy of this profound personal integrity would not die with him. It would echo through the centuries, inspiring leaders and thinkers alike. The philosophical character, having achieved moral integrity and tranquility through rigorous self-training, completes the journey outlined by Epictetus. But the true measure of a philosopher is not the life they lived, but the echo of their voice across the ages. The quiet wisdom of the crippled slave teacher, born from absolute powerlessness, proved to be more durable and politically transformative than the grandest armies and the most ornate temples of the Roman Empire. The final stage of our study is to examine this enduring legacy, the transmission of his revolutionary ideas, and the profound way in which the philosophy of the inner citadel remains vital for modern human beings facing the chaotic anxieties of the contemporary world. The survival of the text, a quiet triumph. The political empire of Rome eventually crumbled, but the voice of Epictetus, preserved meticulously by his student Ariano, did not. The survival of the discourses and the essential manual in Caridian is a testament to the sheer magnetic power of their practicality. The constant companion. Unlike the vast, abstract philosophical works of Plato or Aristotle, The Enchiridion was designed to be portable and personal, a handbook for the moment-to-moment management of the mind. This accessibility ensured its constant use among soldiers, administrators, and thinkers throughout the late Roman period. The Christian absorption. As the Roman world transitioned into the Christian era, Epictetus's works were not discarded. They were often integrated into Christian ethics. The emphasis on providence, duty, the separation of the soul from the body, and the critique of material wealth resonated deeply with early Christian asceticism and morality. In fact, for a time, the Enchiridion was sometimes circulated with a modified preamble suggesting it was the work of a Christian monk, demonstrating how completely its ethical demands aligned with the new religious order. This quiet absorption allowed his Stoic principles to remain a foundational, though often uncredited element of Western moral thought. The Renaissance and the resurgence of Stoicism. The wisdom of Epictetus experienced a dramatic and powerful resurgence during the European Renaissance and the subsequent Age of Enlightenment. The rediscovery. The rediscovery and translation of ancient texts in the 15th and 16th centuries brought Epictetus back into the intellectual foreground. Scholars and emerging humanists were captivated by his focus on human agency and rational self-mastery, ideas that powerfully complemented the period's renewed belief in the potential of the individual. Influence on political thought. Philosophers, seeking a robust ethical framework independent of theological dogma, found Epictetus indispensable. His clear method for maintaining inner freedom in the face of tyranny became deeply influential on thinkers concerned with political liberty and individual conscience. His teachings provided a blueprint for the responsible, resilient citizen, a necessary figure for the emergence of modern liberal thought. Literary and moral influence. The moral rigor of Epictetus directly influenced essayists and moralists across Europe. Figures like Michel de Montaigne and François de la Rochefoucauld utilized Stoic principles to dissect human folly and passion. Epictetus's direct, uncompromising voice offered a sharp contrast to the era's polite formalities, demanding a return to fundamental moral honesty. The modern echo, Epictetus and psychology. Perhaps the most surprising and profound aspect of Epictetus's legacy is his direct, uncredited influence on modern psychology, particularly in the development of therapeutic techniques designed to manage anxiety, depression, and destructive behavioral patterns. The cognitive revolution. Epictetus's core insight: men are not disturbed by things, but by the views they take of them, Enchiridion 5, is the fundamental foundational axiom of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, the most widely used and scientifically validated psychological treatment today. The ABC model. The psychological models used in CBT and rational emotive behavior therapy, REBT, directly reflect Epictetus's teaching. A. Activating event. The external event, the thing outside our control. B. Beliefs or judgment. Our irrational interpretation or judgment of the event, the thing inside our control. C. Consequence. The resulting negative emotion or destructive behavior. The therapeutic work, precisely as Epictetus instructed 2 millennia ago, is focused entirely on correcting B, the judgment, rather than attempting to control A, the external event. The power of self-talk, the Stoic practice of self-correction, and the constant internal dialogue, using reason to interrupt destructive passions, is the philosophical precursor to the modern therapeutic technique of restructuring negative self-talk. The ancient slave philosopher provided the essential roadmap for conquering psychological distress through rigorous, rational self-examination. Epictetus in the 21st century, the timeless relevance. Why does a philosophy forged in the heat of Roman tyranny remain so compelling to people navigating the pressures of the digital age, economic volatility, and global uncertainty? Because the fundamental human condition, the feeling of being overwhelmed by external forces, has not changed. Digital anxiety. In an age of instant, relentless information, the demand to master the discipline of impressions is more urgent than ever. We are constantly assaulted by external data, news of global crisis, social media comparison, and fleeting trends. Epictetus provides the ultimate filter, demanding that we step back, pause, and ask, is this impression about something within my control? If not, why am I giving it my assent and my energy? The pursuit of inner wealth. In a consumerist society obsessed with external wealth and validation, Epictetus's fierce commitment to internal virtue as the only true good remains a radical, revolutionary message. He reminds us that true security lies not in the size of our bank account, but in the reliability of our character. The courage to be consistent. His call for the philosopher to adopt an uncompromising role and practice moral consistency provides a powerful antidote to modern hypocrisy and the moral relativism that often accompanies political compromise. He teaches that the ethical life is not a matter of negotiation, but of unwavering commitment to the logos within. The final lesson, sovereignty of the soul. The entire legacy of Epictetus boils down to a single profound truth, one he discovered while his leg was being broken. Your life is your own to choose, regardless of what the universe delivers. He was stripped of all external freedoms, his body, his location, his property, his name. But in that moment of ultimate powerlessness, he found the ultimate power, the absolute, non-negotiable sovereignty over his own mind and moral will. This philosophy is not about suppressing feelings or becoming immune to the sorrows of life. It is about choosing how you will suffer. Will you suffer as a slave to your circumstances, battered by fear, anger, and irrational desire? Or will you suffer as a sovereign agent, accepting the external events as material for the virtue you choose to exercise? The choice is always present, available in the critical pause between the impression and the assent. The enduring voice of Epictetus, the former slave of Hierapolis, reaches across the chasm of 2,000 years to offer every human being the same ultimate opportunity, to claim the inner citadel and thus to claim the only freedom that truly matters. His life and his teachings offer the definitive proof. The highest form of freedom is always found within.